Let me come back to Craig and talk a little bit about Fritz Mondale. Former Vice President Walter Mondale passed away this week. And Craig, as someone who was in charge of running against Fritz Mondale twice, I believe, I would love to get your thoughts about this remarkable American.
We certainly crossed paths first, I guess, on a campaign trail on opposite sides, but I have a great fondness for Fritz Mondale. I had a chance in later years when we were both out of government to join him on some panels to talk about the vice presidency. And I'm very grateful for a reason I'll mention in a minute, but I always found his insights to be very important and useful, and the stories were fun, and he was always gracious. The gratitude goes to the fact that we forget that for most of our history, vice presidents actually didn't even have an office in the West Wing of the White House. They were up on Capitol Hill in their Senate office, and when the president felt like he wanted to see them, they were invited down and cleared through a gate and came onto the grounds of the White House. Fritz Mondale with Jimmy Carter changed all of that. Now, clearly it was President Carter who wanted something different, but it was Fritz Mondale that made the model really work, because he had an office in the West Wing. And that bit of real estate makes a world of difference. As they say, it changed everything, because now you had the only other elected official nationally in a presidential campaign sitting just down the hall from the president, somebody who can't be fired, elected by the people, and there to support the president. And the commitment that Carter made and the way that Mondale fulfilled the role ensured that the vice president was fully capable and completely read in on the national security issues and the policy decisions that a president was making. And that piece of real estate that Mondale was given the opportunity to have has never been taken away since then. So vice presidents serve in a very different way than they did before Fritz Mondale. And for that, I think we should all be grateful, especially for if you're a vice president of the United States, you should be grateful to him.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I remember Fritz Mondale from the Senate. When I worked in the Senate, I spent 2 years in the Carter White House. And I also remember a lot about him because in many of the intra-party fights, we were on opposite sides. But he's just a good, decent, honest man. And he fought hard for causes like civil rights. He was a staunch advocate of organized labor. I remember once he said he didn't know an issue where he differed from Lane Kirkland, the head of the AFL-CIO, and he was an intensely loyal guy. He was a wonderful heir to Hubert Humphrey in that Minnesota liberal farmer labor democratic tradition. As Craig mentioned, he was the first vice president to have an office in the West Wing, right down the hall from the presidency. And I remember the fight among his top people. There was a little office. It was sort of a corner of Mondale's office. It was about 6 by 6, only room for a desk. But the fight among Mondale's chief staff, that who was going to get into that office, because whoever was in that office was in the power place, even though across the street in the old executive office building was an elegant vice presidential office. As I said, I was often on the other side. In 1972, I worked for Ed Muskie, and he was part of the Humphrey campaign. In 1976, I went to the New York convention hoping that my senator, Ed Muskie, would be Jimmy Carter's pick for vice president, and he picked Mondale. But most of my memories really have to do with the 1984 campaign, where Craig sort of beat him pretty badly. after Reagan's first win, we did a lot of reforming in the Democratic Party, created superdelegates. I happened to be part of the effort because the real effort was to get members of the House and Senate to start going to Democratic conventions again and playing a part in the Democratic Party. And so we created the superdelegates. And in the House, we had this reform caucus led by Tim Wirth of, Gillis Long was the chairman of the caucus, Louisiana, but Tim Wirth of Colorado, who was close to Gary Hart, the rival to Mondale in '84, was one of the leaders, and we decided to elect our House delegates, which were going to be 4 or 5 times as many as went in the 1980 convention, early. And the reason I think that Tim and I talked about doing that is because we thought this is a natural young reform group that would probably be for Gary Hart. But old Fritz Mondale wouldn't let that happen. He outworked Hart so much, it was unbelievable. He talked to every member, and in the end, he won them all. I remember getting a call from Hart the night before the actual vote, complaining that we were doing it early. And I said, Gary, it was on the request of your campaign that we did it early, but it was because Mondale just outworked him. You know, in many ways, Mondale was sort of, and then he, you know, one of his other great attributes, sometimes not a great political attribute, was that he was completely honest. And everybody remembers his convention where he said, I'm going to raise your taxes, and Reagan will too, but here I'm telling you. Well, the voters, I guess, told him that they didn't like it very much. You know, he also picked Jerry Ferraro, and that was a very interesting and historic choice because she was the first woman to run on a national ticket. And that took some courage, but it also was politically smart. You know, even though the general election was no contest, Mondale going into the convention was on very shaky grounds. He'd have very slim, like a handful of vote majority, but the congressional Democrats more and more nervous because they were reading the polls and thought we're going to be in trouble in the fall if Mondale's on this ticket. We're you know, just a thread away from pulling back and changing their support to somebody else. And once Mondale picked Jerry, who was a member of the House, secretary of the Democratic caucus when I was the staff director, he really locked those votes in. I've got a lot of other stories about Fritz, but I'm sure we're short on time. But the other point is he was the end of an era. I wrote a piece last year in The Spy about how I was quoted on the first day of the convention in my penchant for getting in trouble in 1984, saying it was the last hurrah of the Mondale wing of the party. And as everybody knows, we built the DLC after the Mondale loss to change the party. And he was the party establishment in those days, and we were the insurgents. Things changed. Now people think we're the party establishment.
Well, that is indeed all the time we have for